What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, May 11th, 2016, hump day, middle of the weekday, starting that long, slow glide down to Kaahumanu Friday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in with your comments and questions. Obviously, the big news, surprise upset in yesterday's primaries. Bernie Sanders won West Virginia from Hillary Clinton by a wide margin. It wasn't even close. Donald Trump, obviously the only candidate still officially running, swept up two primaries there as well. And there's a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth going on here. I mean, Hillary just keeps imagining that Bernie is going to go away, and it's not happening. And I'll bet the ashtrays were flying against the office walls over at Hillary's last night. And I actually feel sorry for her protective detail, because word is she tends to use them as her personal whipping boys. If things aren't going good, she screams profanities at them, she insults them, and so forth. Now, if you happen to be watching the primary results on Fox News, you got an extra special bonus feature, because apparently during Bernie Sanders' victory speech, Michael Rivero just felt like making some very insulting comments, not realizing that his microphone was still live. And Sean Hannity was trying to say, your mic is hot, your mic is hot. So, once again, Fox News displaying less than professional behavior on the air here. Now, Donald Trump is out there saying that he'd like to have Republican unity, but he doesn't need it to win. And I think it's wise for him to be planning on winning without Republican unity, because there are too many in the GOP leadership who absolutely do not want him to be there. Now, the rank and file all seem to be perfectly okay with him. They really like him. You know, he's come into the campaign with this non-politically correct, straight talk, not going to mess around, here's what's going on and here's how we're going to fix it. And Americans have responded to it, because we're sick and tired of the euphemisms and the blame shifting and the excuses that we get from the established political elite money junkies. But most rank-and-file Republicans are just fine with Donald Trump. It's only the leadership that we have to worry about. Now, here's where it gets a little bit interesting. Ted Cruz had said that if he won Nebraska yesterday, he would restart his campaign. Obviously, that did not happen. And today he's back again talking about restarting his campaign if, quote, there is a path to victory, end quote. Now, is he dropping hints for somebody to shoot Donald Trump? Because that's the only path to victory that could possibly open up. And let us not forget, Ted Cruz is ineligible to be president or vice president of the United States of America. He is not a natural-born U.S. citizen as required by the Constitution. He was born in Canada of parents who were Canadian citizens at the time of his birth, at a time when Canada did not recognize dual citizenship, which means Ted Cruz's mother had renounced her American citizenship. Plus, Ted Cruz's parents were not married when he was born. And in the Immigration and Naturalization Act, there is a specific exception. Children born to Americans out of wedlock in foreign countries do not get automatic birthright citizenship. And they're still pushing this guy on us. They've got no respect for the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. If by some machinations Ted Cruz were made president, I absolutely disavow this government. I will not obey a government that is not in compliance with that Constitution. They are not legal. They are not legitimate. Now, we are hearing what may be going on behind the scenes with all this talk about restarting his campaign. I mean, let's face it, as far as the primaries are concerned, Ted Cruz is spinning his wheels and wasting his time because Trump keeps beating him and beating him and beating him. But he's not sitting idle, because we're seeing this alarming article out of INFOWARS. Cruz operatives plan to stack rules and platform committees at the RNC convention. So the plan is that they're going to hijack the convention. They're going to try and block Donald Trump on that first ballot. Then they're going to kick him out, and they're going to force Cruz on us. And by doing so, they will hand the White House to Hillary Rodham Clinton. Because Hillary Clinton's lawyers will go right to the Supreme Court and say Ted Cruz can't prove he qualifies to be president. And under the 12th Amendment, he can't be vice president. It's just amazing out there. Now, story that came out of Washington Post. Hillary Clinton is a woman and a candidate with seriously complicated woman issues. And they're talking about how, you know, Donald Trump is coming on out and reminding everybody about the serial philanderer Bill Clinton, and how Hillary, rather than reining him in like a normal wife would, just helped him cover it up. Browbeat the women, smear them. Remember the bimbo eruption squad? Hillary was Bill's enabler. He went out and predated on women, groped Kathleen Wiley in the Oval Office on the very day her husband met a suspicious death. So that's that whole issue. And then Hillary turns around and plays the woman card. And there's a certain hypocrisy there. And I've actually gotten emails from Hillary's supporters saying, you shouldn't pick on her. You should let her win because she's a woman. Whatever happened to the feminist revolution, where women were supposed to be treated the equal as men? It seems to be one way. They want the earning power of men, which I don't have a problem with. They want the educational opportunities equal with men. I don't have a problem with that either. But then they want special protections because they're women. That I have a problem with. And I have a problem with choosing presidents based on skin color, gender, orientation. Whatever happened to meritocracy? Whatever happened to finding presidents that we chose because they could do the job, and it didn't matter that they weren't beautiful people. It didn't matter that they dressed funny. Because that isn't what we elected them to do, look good on TV. Now, Sanders is still out there and saying, with some justification, saying the whole Democratic primary process is a rigged system. And he's talking again about the superdelegates. Now, Maine's Democratic Party has moved to drop the superdelegates. It's a good first step. If it weren't for the superdelegates that Hillary's campaign literally bought and paid for ahead of time, the Democratic race would be neck and neck. Bernie Sanders is trailing Hillary in the popular vote by just a very small margin. Hillary's lead is built entirely on those bought and paid for superdelegates. And people need to get it in those superdelegates' face and say, do you understand you're selling out your country for your 30 pieces of silver? Because that's exactly what they're doing. Need to bring back a sense of shame to some of these people. Now, we talked about this yesterday. We're going to talk about it again today. We're going to keep on mentioning this until probably close to the end of the month here. If you are in California and you are going to vote in the California primary, you need to be very careful about how you are registered. Because when you register, you can be Republican, Democrat, Green. You can say no political preference. And most people want no political preference, but there's a box that says independent, and people think that means no political preference. It doesn't. It means the American Independent Party, and it's not made clear. And a lot of people checked that box thinking that means they're not aligned with the Republicans or Democrats, and if they don't correct that, they're going to go into the primary booth and they're going to have a list of names to choose from that aren't any of the ones they wanted to vote for. So if you are in California and you are not sure how you are registered to vote in the primary, you have until May 23rd to check it out. Now, there's an online resource. We have it linked to the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com, and it's registertovote.ca.gov. And you can go on in there and check how you are registered, whether you're Republican, Democrat, no political preference, American Independent Party, Green, or whatever else they have in the list out there. And if you're not where you think you should be, you can re-register up until May 23rd. And if you are in California, please copy off that article and send it to everybody else you know in California, because that confusing registration form could cost Bernie Sanders that California primary, because Bernie Sanders supporters are going to go to the polls and they're not going to have his name on the ballot. Now, even at the best, we say that all that we are seeing is incompetence and stupidity. Not enough ballots at this place, software in the voting machines is voting for the wrong candidate, wrong voter lists get sent out so people are turned away. Even if we're the most generous and say it was all innocent mistake, it is an absolute disgrace that the nation that claims the moral leadership position of democracy, the champion of democracy, we're bringing democracy to the world whether they want it or not, usually at the point of a gun. It is a shame that our election system is such a joke. I refuse to believe that the nation that put men on the moon cannot come up with a reliable, trustworthy, accurate, verifiable, honest system of elections. If our elections are crooked, it's because those in power want them to be crooked to stay in power. Now, latest polls are showing 44% of Democrats are going to vote for Donald Trump if Hillary is the Democratic nominee. We were looking at the poll numbers that came out of Ohio and talking about them yesterday. They did a couple of matchups. Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump is going to win. Donald Trump versus Bernie Sanders. Sanders is going to win. So the rigged election results notwithstanding, it's very clear that when it comes to the order of candidates, it seems to be Sanders, Trump, Hillary. Now, Judicial Watch, say that 3 times fast, Judicial Watch is starting to provide updates on their cases against Hillary Clinton. Judicial Watch has 2 cases before the court, both of them related to Hillary's email server. And what they have been finding out in the recent revelations, the judge has given them discovery, is that the State Department has been hiding key Clinton emails from Judicial Watch in violation of the court order. Now, that's obstruction of justice, and that should get Attorney General Loretta Lynch fired on the spot. I mean, we're seeing all the signs of cover-up here. We were talking about this FBI interview of Hillary Clinton's aide, and in the middle of the questioning, the aide walked out with her attorney. And they came back a little bit. But, you asked a question that we all agreed was off limits here because, I'm here to help you investigate what criminal and espionage activity may have been going on, as long as you agree not to ask me about what criminal and espionage activity may have been going on. That's what they've done. The State Department has said you can talk to our people as long as you don't ask them if they did anything wrong. It's like when they did the so-called investigation into 9/11. And they talked about intelligence failures, and they never even went to the question of who actually did it. That was just a foregone conclusion. It's another whitewash, and people are sick and tired of government cover-ups. They absolutely are. And as Richard Nixon said, it's not the crime that does you in, it is that cover-up. And there's an awareness of a cover-up, and we need to keep on putting that out there, that there's a cover-up. Now, apparently Sidney Blumenthal was asked by Chris Matthews if he had been interviewed by the FBI regarding Hillary's email server. Blumenthal wouldn't answer the question at all. Refused to confirm or deny, sat there in squirming, which to me means yes, and he knows he said some things Hillary is not going to like. So we may find Sidney Blumenthal getting really, really depressed and shooting himself in Fort Marcy Park. Now, the New York Times is out there on full defensive mode for Hillary Clinton, and they came out with this article, Released Emails Show Use of Unclassified Systems Was Routine. And they're going on saying, there was this time when documents were sent by regular email, and later they were classified, and it was no big deal, blah, 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 blah. The New York Times was not allowing comments on the piece for reasons that would be very, very obvious. The example they used was for non-secure email to be used for documents that were unclassified. They're still trying to claim that Hillary's documents weren't classified until long after the fact. No, we know some of them were classified on creation. In particular, satellite intelligence data is automatically classified on creation. So the New York Times is lying to us again here. And there is still a big hole in Hillary's story about classified information or not. Hillary Clinton never used her secure government email account. She claims she never had classified material on her private email server. The job of Secretary of State involves a huge amount of classified information, so what server did she use? If it wasn't her government server and her private server, was there a third system out there yet to be discovered? I don't think so. We know there's lots of classified information on Hillary's server. We have to ask, and ask again, and ask again, the following question. Remember Chinagate from 1996? Then President Bill Clinton authorized the sale of sensitive U.S. technology to China, and Chinese money was donated to his re-election campaign. Is Hillary playing that same game? Was she selling U.S. secrets delivered via a private email server with weaker security than Ashley Madison in exchange for donations to her charitable foundation? It's a legitimate question to ask. It deserves an honest investigation and answer. Now we've got the story, of course, about Brian Pagliano's emails, which the State Department is saying, by golly, we can't find any of them. Now, Brian Pagliano's the guy who set up or refurbished Hillary's private email server. We're now finding out that the actual hardware dated back to Bill Clinton's presidency, and they had a private email server there as well to keep certain things out of view of government oversight. So Brian Pagliano set up the email server, was working for Hillary Clinton at the State Department, and investigators wanted the emails because Pagliano is apparently at the moment cooperating. He's got a immunity deal. And the State Department came out and said, can't find them. Can't find them. Gosh darn, we've got all the emails up to his hiring and all the emails after he left, and we've got all the emails for everybody else. We just can't find his at all. Golly gee whiz. It's like the State Department doesn't have backups? And doesn't the NSA have all of it anyway? Again, it reeks of a cover-up, and what the State Department has done is obstruction of justice. Destruction of evidence. They can't say it was an honest mistake. Everybody knows that this was going to be an issue. What was the FBI doing? Why didn't they move to secure that data in the first place? They knew Hillary was deleting stuff off of her own server before she turned it over. Now, by the way, about this missing email for Brian Pagliano. Yesterday morning, all three major news networks ignored the story. ABC's Good Morning America, CBS This Morning, NBC's Today didn't mention it. But they did spend 8 minutes and 38 seconds on a new anti-aging gel. Fox News ran the story very briefly, and that was basically it. So, once again, the independent media, that's you, has to do the job the corporate media claims to do, but never does. So grab all the articles about Brian Pagliano's emails vanishing from inside the State Department and flood your social media with them. Yes, the corporate media's got all the money, but we outnumber them. We can force this into the public eye, even over the anti-aging gel on those networks. All right, we're coming up on our first commercial break here, and when we come on back, we're going to be talking about the email server again. We're going to keep on pounding on that issue. And then Facebook's alleged bias. So we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, one of the other things that's going on here with the Hillary Clinton email scandal, which the corporate media, if they're not doing like the New York Times and saying, look, it's no big deal, really, then they're ignoring the story completely. And one of the issues that, for the most part, the corporate media has ignored, of course, is Cheryl Mills storming out of the FBI interview, apparently more than once, and her refusal to answer certain questions. With this attitude of, you're not allowed to ask that question of me, you man, you. There's also a story that FBI Director James Comey is holding a closed-door meeting with reporters today to update them on the case. Why is the door closed if they're reporters? Unless what he's in there is telling them what they may not report on. Maybe he's giving them all national security letters. Under no circumstance will you ever mention the possibility that Hillary was committing treason while Secretary of State by selling classified information to foreign governments and collecting and laundering the payments through her foundation. Because a scandal like that, that's going to bring the whole government down. And everybody's worried about their taxpayer-funded paychecks. They want that money to keep on going on in. People love working for the government. You don't really have to do anything. And you're making, about 50% more than private citizens for the same job, even if you were actually doing something, other than sitting around all day looking at online porn. Now, the U.S. Senate has launched an inquiry over Facebook's alleged political bias in the trending news lists. These former employees of Facebook have come on out and said that their job was to make sure certain viewpoints, primarily conservative, were not allowed to show up very high on the trending news display. Zuckerberg is absolutely categorically denying it, but you do have these former employees saying that it was happening, and you have a lot of people who are just wondering why certain articles with a lot of hits on them just never seem to go anywhere. Now, I'd like to make a point here, okay? I think that anybody who's out there trying to distort, conceal, spin away, shout down, hack the servers of citizens expressing legitimate political opinions are in violation of the First Amendment. And you take all these people together, Facebook, all the million-dollar troll army, and you put them all together, there's one heck of a class action civil rights trial to be fought and won. And the problem I have with Hillary's supporters is you're never going to convince them she's a bad person. They already know what she's done. They think it's fun. They think it's cool. They think it's good jollies to subvert democracy and deny other people their voice and their rights. They don't care. But they are committing civil rights violations every time they shut down another opinion through nefarious means. The reason we have freedom of speech is to have an open debate. Person A has their say, person B has their say, the people make up their own mind. It's not supposed to be where person A starts to talk and person B gets out a gong and starts wailing on it and saying, this is my First Amendment right to freedom of speech. It's not the way it's supposed to work. And for everybody who thinks otherwise, if you really want to live in a dictatorship without freedom of speech, there are plenty of other nations on earth that you can move to, and I encourage you to do so. And stop messing about with the United States of America. Now, the boss of Facebook's trending system is a major Hillary Clinton donor. Little bit of a head-scratcher on that one. Joe Biden has come on out and once again reiterated he is not interested in becoming the Democratic nominee for president should it go to a brokered Democratic convention if Hillary should actually be brought down by Judicial Watch. He simply does not want to. Basically, Joe doesn't want to get really depressed and shoot himself twice in Fort Marcy Park. That seems to happen an awful lot to people that are in Hillary's way. They should make that park a lot bigger, actually, because they're running out of space. Now, down there, okay, there's our music. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, down in Brazil, there is a real circus going on down there, and I don't mean carnival or anything fun like that. President Dilma Rousseff was up for impeachment. There was an impeachment vote. Then Brazil's Congress halted the impeachment on a technicality, procedural rule. Then we're seeing a day later reports coming on in that the CIA-supported coup is back on and Rousseff could be removed today. Could be happening already. And what it's done is it's absolutely trashed the credibility of the government and the Brazilian Constitution. And the Brazilian people are already on the verge of rioting over the economic hardship. Look at all this chaos being created across the world by the U.S. government's constant meddling in other people's countries. Now, in the current draft version of the National Defense Authorization Act, which is sort of an omnibus bill to take a huge amount of money and spend it on things like, well, torturing U.S. citizens just because they might be terrorists. And if they aren't terrorists when you start to torture them, probably they will be by the time you're done. But the current draft NDAA includes, it's a $500 billion. And it includes some $60 billion worth of money for what is termed overseas contingency operations, which is kind of a Pentagon slush fund that the Pentagon can spend wherever they think they want to. Now, it looks like this is a cut from last year's $612 billion bill, but it's misleading because the current NDAA only includes the first 4 months of 2017, figuring that whoever wins in November is going to be changing everything after that. So in point of fact, the cost has actually gone up, as it always does. Now, let's talk about the F-35. The Pentagon has actually found something the F-35 is actually good for. Despite all of its problems, the radar keeps resetting, all these other things. They finally found something the F-35 is really good at. They're going to start sending them around to air shows to show how great American military aviation is. That's it. It's now a circus performer. I wonder if they're going to put a big red nose on the front of it. That would certainly be appropriate here. And it's going to look really good because it's going to be performing alongside World War II fighters in this air show tour. I hope they don't embarrass it the way those 1970s planes did. Over in Iraq, things continue to get worse. Ever since Muqtada al-Sadr's demonstration of walking into the green zone, taking over parliament, and then leaving, the Iraq government has shown zero interest in actually trying to deal with the political corruption. And as a result, there's more pressure coming in on the puppet regime in Baghdad to just leave. And so Iraq is, in many different contexts, literally on the brink of collapse. Another wonderful foreign policy success for the United States of America. Now, up in Syria, because there is a tacit ceasefire in place, Russia has put their operations over Aleppo on hold, but with caveats, saying that everybody has to go along with the ceasefire, or it's not a ceasefire, it's just a one-way hunting license. And this story was barely out before we got word that U.S.-backed terrorists have just launched a major offensive to try and retake Aleppo. Which shows that, yes, the only reason the U.S. went along with the ceasefire was to give themselves time to rearm and resupply their little pet terrorist groups in Syria. It is amazing over there. All righty, now, here's... I love this article. It's almost plaintive. This is from the Daily Mail in Great Britain, about how the United States has spent $7 billion on 5,000 airstrikes against ISIS targets, but still is having trouble convincing Iraqis that it doesn't support the terror group. Mainly because in Iraq and Syria, the airstrikes the U.S. claims are aimed at ISIS actually hit critical infrastructure like power plants, pipelines, food storage, and hospitals. And the U.S. always comes back and says, oh, was a mistake, our bad, we thought that was an ISIS supermarket. You can only get away with that once or twice when it becomes a permanent public relations meme, nobody's going to buy it anymore. And it's kind of amazing when the corporate media says, why don't those people in Iraq and Syria believe us that we're against ISIS and Al-Qaeda? Well, don't forget, Judicial Watch pried loose documents from the State Department that, yes, in point of fact, the U.S. is creating, arming, and supplying and training these groups to use as proxies. There was another video came out where the Syrian army overran one of the ISIS positions and found it loaded with U.S.-issued weapons, ammunition, MREs, medical supplies, all made in the USA and paid for by your tax dollars. How many more times do you have to be lied to until you understand and are willing to stand up and say, this government is lying to us about everything, and I will not listen to them any longer? Now, over in Iran, which is still apparently in the gun sights of the United States of America, the Russian S-300 missile system is now deployed to Iran's air defense system. It's in the field, it's set up, it's ready to go, it's active. And that is going to give both the United States and Israel pause flying into other people's countries to commit mayhem. Meanwhile, the United Nations, which has been looking at what's going on in Syria and Iraq, is out there saying that it is necessary for warring parties to stop attacking unlawful targets such as hospitals and other civilian sites. The UN, of course, chickened out and didn't name anybody, but we know who they're talking about. All right, let's talk about the economy a little bit. Banks are under pressure yet again. Deutsche shares dropped almost 3%. Let's see how our stock market ended up today. Was having a rough day all along. Yeah, down 217 on the Dow. Zimbabwe is in a cash crisis. Once again, their currency is inflating so rapidly they can't keep up with it. They've now been given permission to print up their own dollars. Now, back when Zimbabwe had this paper currency that was $100 trillion, that was in Zimbabwe dollars. Then they were given they changed over their economic system to tie their currency to the U.S. dollar. But now they need so many of them coming on in that apparently the Treasury just said, just make up your own. Well, if Zimbabwe can just make up their dollars to pay their bills, why can't we the people? Seems rather unfair to me. But Zimbabwe is now imposing limits on bank withdrawals and appears to be one of the first countries in Africa to go along with this idea of a cashless society. It's all going to be digital. All the wealth belong to us, and you will have to explain to us why we should let you have any of it. Even though you worked for it and technically it's yours, it's under our control. And that's a system of enslavement. When you have your money in your pocket under your control and you can go out and buy a comic book without anybody's permission, you're a free citizen. If you have to go and run a card so the bank can authorize you to buy the comic book, you are a slave. Another article coming out of Patriot Rising. Has the global depression begun? U.S. rail traffic and the Baltic Dry Index are headed down yet again. U.S. rail traffic is down more than 11% from a year ago. That's an absolutely disastrous number. And I read this story a little while ago where I think it's Union Pacific has something like almost 300 locomotives sitting idle out in Arizona, which is a good climate if you've got rolling stock you're not using and you don't want it to rust and corrode. You put it out in Arizona. But that's a huge cash outflow to be making payments on all those locomotives and not getting any work out of them. The whole system is locking up. Now, Macy's department stores are reporting horrible numbers. Their operating income has declined by 36%. If it keeps going like this, the balloons in next year's Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade are basically going to be a couple of inflated baggies on a wire. Nobody's buying things. Nobody's buying things. Office Depot has fallen 34% in pre-market trading, and Staples is down 15% after their planned merger falls apart. And behind it all, we see the corporate media. We talked about this with the Washington Post yesterday. It's all the fault of the American people. The economic recovery would be working just fine if you, the American people, would run down to the store and buy a whole new clothes wardrobe, maybe a new bed, a new computer, new cell phone, new tablet, maybe a new 4K big screen TV, throw in a new car there as well. If you would all do that, the economy would be great. What part of we don't have any money out here are these bozos not getting? The money junkies grabbed it all. Private central banking was intentionally designed to do that. Grab all the wealth of the nation and put it in the bankers' pockets. And there aren't enough of these bankers out there to support a consumer economy. There's only a few of them. They can't run around every shopping mall buying up every product to keep commerce going. And they don't want to. They take all that money that they've siphoned out of society and pile it up in a big pile in the living room, and they take their clothes off and roll around on it and have orgasms. That's what they get the money for. They're money junkies. They get the rush. And to see newspapers like the Washington Post out there saying that the only reason the economy isn't working is because stingy Americans refuse to spend more money. I don't know about you. I love spending money. I'd love to spend money. I'd love to buy a new car. I'd love to buy more jewelry for my wife. I don't have money to do that. And unlike the United States government, I refuse to borrow any money unless I am confident I can pay it back. And that is true for the vast majority of Americans. We don't want more loans. We want high-paying jobs. And without those high-paying jobs being brought back, this economy is doomed. No matter what harebrained scheme they come up with to prolong their wealth and power, negative interest rates, cashless society, blaming Americans and saying you've got to spend your savings account and your retirement money, you've got to buy products now. Doesn't really matter. In the end, it's going to come crashing down until that mechanism to recycle the wealth from the top back down to the working and middle classes is restored. This economy is doomed. They couldn't have done more damage to this economy since 2008 if they had intended to. Maybe they did. As part of the New World Order, they need to crash the U.S. economy, drive us down into Zimbabwe-like economic conditions, and then we'll welcome our New World Order masters. Oh, please come in, give me more ink and paper so that I can feed my family. Because before the New World Order can build a new world, they have to destroy the old one. All empires are built on the ruins of previous empires. That's what's going on. Now, here's a story, and it shows you just how selfish these money junkies are. There's an article out here from Patriot Rising. Fewer babies during the recession causing ripple effects. The market's not going to grow. Oh, how terrible. They're not having children who will grow up to be the customers of our children. Now, if you look at private central banking, you will understand it is a pyramid, and it does require a larger population with each generation because it needs a wider base of new borrowers to allow the creation of money, much of which is then siphoned off to pay the interest accumulating on those higher levels on the pyramid. If you start seeing a population decline, that pyramid is about to fall down, go boom. So, fewer babies during the recession. Obviously, a lot of people who have the choice are choosing not to have children in these very dark times. Or maybe we are seeing the effects of the escape of the epicyte gene into the biosphere, because it's been a sudden drop in birth rates in the United States, primarily affecting the Hispanic population, who are the highest per capita consumers of corn. And traditionally, the Hispanics are a little less into birth control and abortion than some of the other demographics. So it's a complex issue here, but to hear these money junkies whining, you have to have more babies, we need more customers to keep the economy going, at a time when you have these other groups over here saying, oh, the earth is hideously overpopulated, we've got to cut our population someplace. Okay, good idea. Let's start with the money junkies, because they're causing all the damage. Over at The Intercept, they ran a story how investigators with GPS units had discovered that despite all the negative publicity and all of the enforcement effort and money that was poured into it, the problem with toxic electronic waste still exists. Discarded electronics here in the United States of America are still being shipped to third world countries and stripped for their valuable metals, mostly by child labor in very poor conditions, where these kids are breathing these toxic fumes from burning up the boards and everything to recover the metals. And my comment to that is, think how much toxic pollution could be avoided if companies built their products to last for 20 years instead of only 2. But then, of course, we'd have a product that lasted 20 years, and the corporations want us to come back every 2 to 3 years and buy a new whatever. We're seeing that over with Apple and the iPhone. They're out there saying, why aren't people buying the latest iPhone? Well, because my old one still works and I don't have any money. And now we've seen Microsoft put out that patch for Windows 7 machines that bricks them, literally stops them from working, and says, well, too bad, you should upgrade to Windows 10. We're in a heck of a fix here. And unfortunately, nobody who's currently in control of either the economic or political system wants to do what is necessary to get us out of it. It's just a mad dash and a scramble to grab as much as they can before it all comes apart. Grab the silverware and skedaddle for the door. Head for the Cayman Islands. The Bushes are going to head down to that big piece of land they bought in South America, their own little country within a country. Everybody's out for themselves. You and I, we're probably not going to have room for us in the lifeboats, is basically what it comes down to. All right, we're going to take care of business here. We're going to have a few more commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the economy. Now, Hillary Clinton's son-in-law, Mark Mezvinsky, had a hedge fund that was based on the Greek recovery. Doesn't sound like he was all that smart. His Greek recovery hedge fund has lost 90%, and he's had to shut it down. And just because people are rich doesn't mean they're smarter. They're luckier. They married the right families. And it's a common feature that you're going to see. People with advantages think they're naturally superior, rather than seeing themselves just as regular people who have advantages. Andrew Carnegie actually believed that the ultra-rich were a completely different species of human beings, superior to ordinary ones, therefore having the right to manipulate and use the ordinary ones, so forth and so on. Now, over in Greece, as you know, they're dealing with this third bailout situation, which is not a bailout, it's yet another loan. The money is going to come into Greece, 95% of it immediately go back out to the banks, and the people of Greece will be plunged even deeper into debt at a time when government spending on their infrastructure and social services is cut and taxes are going up. Well, I think the Greek people have hit a breaking point, because they're talking Grexit, and they're talking about going back to the drachma, and they, I think, are angry enough to kick out the current Greek government and saying, we're going to go our own way. It's going to flash all over at the same time. You're going to see one country sink into revolution, and it's going to start happening all across the globe. We're going to take a phone call here. Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. How you doing there? Aloha. Michael, I wanted to talk to you about a situation. Back in 2008, I was blessed of my plant closing, GM up here in Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I missed the guys, Michael. I had a lot of friends that you know, Michael, this was the first time, I got to tell you, the last week, it was the first time I went out to try to get a part-time job in one of the churches.
Yeah.
So I got in there and put my application, Mike. You know what? I kept calling them saying, did you look at my application? Mikey, they sent a letter after they said they got the job filled. They said they had so many applications, they didn't even have time to cover even half of them, Mikey. That's how bad it is. They had so many applications that they said we're sorry we didn't even get to yours, and we didn't even get to one quarter to do interviews. for one part-time job.
Yeah.
But, you know, Mikey, this is the thing. I was talking to you years back about Mr. John Brown's orange tree, of how the root system was starting to fail, and people come out and saw those dead branches happening. And then you see the situation coming where
Scott,
now it's
now
it's the upper tree branches.
Well, I mean, the economy works the same way. Scott, I'm going to hold you over our station break, so don't go away, and when we come on back, I want you to talk about what it is you're going through, because I'm sure there's only about maybe 200 million Americans are going through the same thing. So we'll be back after these few words with Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 2. We're going to go right back to Scott in Wisconsin, and yeah, I'm hearing that from all over the U.S., where somebody will offer a job and there'll be something like 2,000-3,000 applicants. It really is horrible out there. I mean, the government is out there in this election year trying to insist there's a recovery and unemployment's only 5%. But we know there are more than 90 million Americans willing and able to work who have not been able to find jobs for years. And our government thinks, okay, fine, we're going to bring in a whole bunch of illegal immigrants to further stress the job market and a bunch of refugees from the Middle East. Because, hey, unemployment's only 5%. So why don't you pick up and tell us about what you were experiencing?
Oh, you know, Michael, that's right, brother. I'm so proud of you, Michael, of preaching two-edged sword on this stuff. It's really sad because they were kind of sad that they couldn't even give me an interview in their letter, and it goes back to what I was saying, Mikey. When you I use that as a parable, is that orange tree starts to die, then they start cutting the branches off, and pretty soon we're getting up to the top of the tree where there's nothing left of the tree to survive. And this is like you were talking about with Brazil, with all these nations that got tied into this central banking system scheme, and now the domino effect is just coming down so fast to where it's just going to, like you said, it's going to hit the fan, and it's going to be, the brakes are going to come to a stop. So, Mikey, I tell you what, I went out the other day, and I'll tell you the goodness on this one, and I'll let you go. I went out in my shopping news. I saw another part-time job that I saw about 3 months ago. I got in my car Monday morning, went up there. The lady, I filled my application out. She took me right there in for my interview. And now I'll be blessed maybe with a part-time job on that end. But it's just sad, Mikey, that across this nation, the inner part of the system of the American middleman has been gutted out. And now we're seeing the results of this horrifying thing to come. And I hope, like you were saying, there is going to be a brighter side on the outcome, but we're going to have to go through the bad things and stay humble. So,
well, we're already into the bad things. We're already into the bad things here. What we need to do, if there is, in fact, going to be a global revolution, and it looks like it. It looks like the push to globalize the world and get ready for the New World Order has brought us to the edge of a global revolution where no politician and no money junkie anywhere on earth is going to be safe, which, by the way, I think is a good thing. We have to come out of it with an absolute dedication that there will be no more such a thing as a privately owned central bank controlling the public currency and lending it out at interest. It is a system that is great for the private central bankers and their pet politicians, and it is terrible for humanity. It's time for it to come to an end.
Yeah, that's right, Mikey. And I thank you I get excited. You stay on the front line of all these important things, but I really get excited when you talk about the economic thing. And you're talking, like you were saying, these big businesses starting to falter. What more does it take to see some of these Americans to even see what's happening? So, Mikey, thanks for taking my call. Aloha. Say hi to Claire. God bless you guys, and I'll pray for you. And thank you. You take care, buddy.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Americans see what's happening. Americans see what is happening. And we know who is at fault. That's why you have the Washington Journal is out there trying to protect the money junkies by saying, oh, it's really all your fault. Wall Street didn't do anything wrong. The federal government didn't do anything wrong. It's really all your fault because you are refusing to spend more money. That's it. They're trying to protect the system because money and banks are far more important than human beings in the United States of America. I mean, they're really rubbing your noses in that. But we need to go back to the economic system the United States started with because that system worked for the nation and for the people. And yes, there were problems because even back then, there were people who were trying to hijack the nation's economy and turn it into a privatized, for-profit operation. That's why Alexander Hamilton gets to keep his place on the currency. He was the private central banker's agent inside the young United States of America. So, anyway. Now then, current estimate to bring the U.S. infrastructure up to a reasonable standard of usability is somewhere around $3.32 trillion with a T. That is how bad the government that takes your tax dollars has neglected your nation. The deal was that we would allow the government to manage our nation, not other people's nations. We would give them some of our money to keep the roads repaired, the bridges safe, the rails working, the power system up and running, storm drains open. It hasn't happened. We're in a wartime economy where the government is taking huge amounts of our money. Most people are now spending more in taxes than they spend on their housing, food, and clothing put together. And they are not getting value for money because the government takes that money and it gives it to their friends on Wall Street, their friends in Tel Aviv, and the war machine to go on out and conquer the earth for the infinite glory of the neocons. And our nation is crumbling right before our eyes. And they're hoping that because it's slow, you don't really see it. But maybe what you ought to do is go back into Google and just look for pictures of American life from, say, the 1950s. And look at how the curbings are all solid, the roads are smooth. You start looking at that and realizing that you look around today. The curbings are all cracked. The roads are full of potholes. This one that we've got out in front of our home, every day, another 3-4 potholes. And we're talking about real big ones because the road was not properly built to begin with. Power failures. We had a transformer blow up here last weekend. Boy, was that spectacular, just over that away. The nation is falling apart. Your taxes are buying better quality roads for Israel than for the United States of America. The illegal immigrant families are getting more support from the government than the legal American families. Is any of this making any sense? Is this a government that is taking care of the United States of America? First, foremost, and always? Apparently not. They figure we're a captive audience. We don't need to care about the legal Americans. We got them. They're not going anywhere. They're our slaves in perpetuity. Okay, over in France, things are getting very tense there because, as you know, they are also dealing with austerity, which is code word for you must make do with less so the bankers can have more. You have to make do with less so the bankers can have more. You have to do with less so the bankers can have more because bankers are gods incarnate. And we cannot question and defy the gods. So there was a new labor bill, which was basically removing worker protections, basically it was a giveaway to business and stripping the workers of protections and rights and reducing pensions, various things like that. It was a very unpopular bill with the French people, and it was looking like it was going to fail in Parliament. So the French government figured out a way around that. They just basically declared it the law without allowing Parliament to vote on it. Now, the French have a very traditional way of dealing with rulers who don't listen to the people. It's called the guillotine. Now, they're not there yet because the French people have declared strikes, 2 days of strikes next week, and the parliament that was bypassed is now getting ready to hold a no-confidence vote on the French government. And if the government loses the no-confidence vote, hopefully they'll step down. If they refuse to, then we're looking at a civil war erupting in the middle of France. Over in Rome, major protests against the transatlantic trade and investment partnership. You can almost feel the anger building all over the globe against the money junkies and the fascists. Down in Venezuela, things are getting very, very ugly. The Venezuelan people are so hungry, they're hunting and eating dogs, cats, pigeons. The Venezuelan government has now deployed tanks against the protesters. 4 have been killed, 1,200 arrested. That was a very reckless and foolish thing to do, because when the people of a nation see the government deploy military weapons against the people, then it's already a civil war. Now, as you know, a lot of business has been done and a lot of malfeasance covered up with creative bookkeeping. We all remember how Enron got into such trouble with the mark-to-market accounting system, which basically allowed them to sort of make up the profits they were making, which never materialized. Well, the problem is that all these little bookkeeping tricks remain inside the books that they make look good, and they accumulate. And sometimes people forget they're even in there, unless they go back in and do a visual inspection of the spreadsheet. And now it's becoming an economic minefield, because over at the energy giant Abencoa, creditors going through the books have found one of these and realized that the company's in far worse economic shape than they thought. Now, turning to Britain and the Brexit. That, too, is getting very, very intense. The British people are still very angry over U.S. efforts to interfere, whether it's Obama going on over there and saying, you know, you have to stay merged with the European Union. Now, John Kerry is out there saying the U.S. will be very hurt if Britain leaves the European Union, to which I'm sure most of the British people are going to say, we don't care. Be hurt. Now, Boris Johnson has branded Prime Minister David Cameron totally demented for the comment he made, saying that if Britain left the European Union, it would start World War III. It was a nonsensical claim to begin with, and Boris has called him on it. Union leader Enrico Tortolano is out there saying the European Union has plunged tens of millions into abject poverty, therefore you should vote leave. And he's right. That's the whole point of the European Central Bank, or any private central bank, to make the owners of the bank insanely rich by plunging the population into poverty. And there's more than just money there, because remember, the New World Order cannot come into being until every nation on earth is at the same level of dirt poor, desperation. Then they can drop the borders. So the American economy that our parents and my generation worked to make so great has to be sabotaged and brought down to the same level as Mexico or Costa Rica or, for that matter, Zimbabwe. So the New World Orders can drop the border and say, we have a one-world government and I am ruler of the earth. Good time for the Klingons to show up, I think. Now then, it turns out the pro-EU, Britain Stronger in Europe campaign is getting a lot of support from people in the United States of America. Apparently, Goldman Sachs, Access Industries, Citi, Morgan Stanley, Grove Point Capital, Canary Wharf Group, Eurostar, Airbus Individuals who are contributing to try and keep Britain entrapped by the ECB and EU include Lloyd Dorfman, who founded Travelex, Frank Petitgas, global co-head of Morgan Stanley, Damon Buffini, former head of Permaria, Sir Evelyn de Rothschild, a billionaire financier who spent a night of his honeymoon with his third wife, staying at the White House as the Clintons' guest, and Jeremy Isaacs, former CEO of Lehman Brothers. They all understand what this is about, enslaving the world to private central banks, and nobody can be allowed to leave. If you've read my article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, you see the pattern. The private central bankers have held the world their prisoner and their debt slave for 300 years, and anytime somebody tries to break free, they make war on them, they subvert them, they change the government. There have been assassinations. And they're very good at what they do because they've had a lot of practice. The problem is, for them, now the world understands what's been going on. Ever since I put out that article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, I've been getting all these emails from people saying, all of a sudden, for the first time in my life, history makes sense. It makes sense. Now I understand the cause and effect. Schools don't teach you cause and effect. They don't teach you the things that are going on behind. What schools call history is just an isolated list of events. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And you walk out of class convinced that you know history because you know the name Columbus, you know he did something on the Atlantic, and you know it happened in 1492. And you are not being told why, how. You're not told about how the government that sponsored him tried to cheat him of the fame. Give the credit to their good buddy Amerigo Vespucci. They don't want you being aware of cause and effect. History isn't a bunch of isolated incidents. It's this long, intertwined, continual dance between cause and effect, but they don't want you to see that because then they risk you seeing the cause and effect behind events happening today. And that makes you dangerous to the political elite. They don't want thinkers. They just want obedient workers. They don't want you to think. That's a big part of what Common Core was all about. Only the rich should be allowed to think. Now, over in Greece, along with all their economic problems and the rest of it, they're also dealing with this flood of refugees pouring on in. And apparently there's been a big stink where a group of refugee children burned the German flag at the same time they were demanding Germany let them come in. Well, I got to tell you, if you're trying to get into a country, burning that country's flag is not a good opening gambit. Saluting that flag, learning the language, saying, I will agree to obey German laws. But, I mean, can you imagine somebody in Mexico setting fire to the American flag and then saying, I demand you let me... Well, what am I saying? Of course they'd let him in with our current immigration policy. Let's pick another country. Okay, let's imagine somebody in Germany trying to get into France, burning the French flag. They wouldn't get very far. Speaking of Germany, polls are now showing that next year's elections are probably going to be Angela Merkel's pink slip. More than 60% of Germans want her gone because of this immigration crisis and this constant pandering to the European Union and the European Central Bank. A lot of people are very angry with Angela Merkel because she backed off the gold repatriation. Germany had entrusted huge amounts of their physical gold to U.S. vaults, basically after World War II, out of fear of an imminent Soviet invasion, which of course never materialized. And then Germany decided they wanted it back. Ooh, bit of a problem. The New York Federal Reserve and the Bank of England and the Bank of France had been playing around with Germany's gold, leasing it out the back door, selling it to help suppress physical gold and silver prices. They don't actually have the gold there anymore. And it should have been a big, huge stink. But the Bundesbank said, we trust our friends at the New York Federal Reserve. And Merkel backed off and said, all right, I guess we don't need our gold back. And a lot of Germans are angry with her for that. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, John Kerry is making the rounds of commencement addresses, and he has a consistent theme. It's time to prepare for the borderless world. And he says anybody who thinks that there ought to be sovereign, separate nations, it's a rose-tinted view of the past, it didn't really exist to begin with, you should just surrender that idea and get ready to graduate into the borderless world. He's up there saying, ein Volk, ein Welt, ein private central bank. One people, one world, one private central bank. That's the goal. Because the end result of the New World Order is zero choice for the people. You will use currency loaned at interest from the global central bank. You will buy GMO food. You will have these vaccines. There is no alternative except the New World Order government. That's the goal of it. It will be history's greatest tyranny. Now, backing up to the Clintons here, there's an article, we just posted it from pmnightlynews.com, and apparently there is a financial advisor on Wall Street, Charles Ortel, who has been studying the workings of the Clinton Foundation. And he says, in his opinion, it is a massive fraud. It's an absolute, complete fraud. It's been operating in a boldly illegal fashion. It's a charity fraud. It's being used as a slush fund because the Clintons use the charitable foundation for all their travel expenses, which are first class and luxurious. And he points out one of the areas of concern is that donations to the Clinton Foundation are primarily funneled through Canadian corporations to conceal where they're really coming from. Then they're bundled together and sent to the Clinton Foundation under the name of the Canadian corporation to conceal who actually sent the money. This goes all the way back to that question I am asking. And I will continue to ask until somebody comes up with a really good answer. Was Hillary Clinton repeating the 1996 Chinagate scandal? Was she selling America's secrets to foreign governments through her weak private email server and using her so-called charitable foundation to collect and launder the money? It's a valid question. It needs to be asked. It deserves to be answered. And the fact that the corporate media and even the FBI and Justice Department won't even touch this question, even to ridicule it and dismiss it, I think tells us a lot about what's going on. Now then, down in Mexico, former President Vincent Fox is ready to go to war with America if Donald Trump wants to build a wall to keep the Mexicans out of a country that does not belong to them. And he's out there talking about, well, listen, Vinny, listen to me. Before you get too big for your britches, I would like you to think back into history and remember the reason California and Texas are now part of the United States. Because the last time you declared war on the United States, you got whipped pretty badly. And today we are a nuclear power. So you might want to curb that language. Vincente Fox is out there basically being an accessory to a crime. Crossing a border without permission is a criminal act. It certainly is going into Mexico. You're not allowed to just walk into Mexico and get free stuff and go to work and have fun. You will go to jail. If you want a fair immigration policy, we should exactly mirror that of Mexico along our southern border and mirror that of Canada on our northern border. Wouldn't that be fair? Rather than just opening the gates? Now then, justice for Jack. This story is starting to build momentum, and this is about Jack Yantis. Now, to give you, well, we're coming up on a commercial break. I'm going to start and give you the background now, talk about it in the second half. This is a perfect example. I'd like to say it's an isolated incident, but unfortunately in our current America, no, it isn't. This sort of thing is happening on a regular basis. Jack Yantis was the 62-year-old rancher killed by Adams County, Idaho deputies last November. When we come back from these commercials, I'll tell you the story. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about Jack Yantis, and this is an absolute atrocity, unfortunately not isolated in our current society, where the police are no longer being trained to deal with crime, but to act as a repressive force on the general population, to keep us scared, to keep us down, to keep us from basically standing up and saying, boy, you people in the banks and the government, you really messed up this place. We had a perfectly good country here until the greed started getting the better of common sense. So getting on back to Jack Yantis. Jack Yantis, 62-year-old rancher. Perfectly harmless, no prior criminal record, no indications of violence. Last November, one of his bulls broke out of its pen, started wandering on out to the highway, was struck by a vehicle, was wounded, and because it was wounded, was acting aggressively. The Adams County Sheriff's Department phoned Jack Yantis and said, can you please come out here and put the bull down? Yantis went on out to where the bull was, got out of his car, took out his rifle, and was promptly shot dead by two Adams County sheriffs, who then tried to claim that Yantis had pointed his rifle at them and threatened to kill them, something that anybody who knows Yantis knows is completely absurd. Now, one of those police officers who shot him has now gone on the run. Has multiple guns, may have explosives, has already said publicly, if the police approach me, I will start shooting. And this was a guy with a prior record of domestic violence, and they still give him a gun and a badge. So the Adams County Sheriff's Department were trying to keep a lid on this. They put out what's called an attempt to locate, an ATL, and they marked it police sensitive, internal only. They were trying to basically get control of this wild man without the public catching on. But the public has now caught on. And so the Adams County Sheriff's Department had to go along with a public meeting, council meeting earlier this week. And this woman got up to read a prepared statement about how wrong this was. And then afterwards she got a chance to question Adams County Sheriff Ryan Zolman. And basically, he just sort of slunk away. He didn't have an answer for her. Acted like a third grader, just sulking, like, how dare you annoy me? Now, here is a weird story from up in Kalamazoo. A guy by the name of James Ronald Dunnigan was in an emergency room. And I guess he didn't have his Obamacare compliant insurance. They asked him to leave. He wouldn't leave. The police showed up and arrested him, and he dies in police custody. Now, the initial report that came on out said the death of this man in police custody was suspicious. Oh, that's a problem. We got to do something about that, and they did. Today they issued another statement. Oh, the death is absolutely not suspicious. Natural causes. That's absolutely it, because when the police grab you and throw you into a cell on your head, naturally you're going to die. Now, let's talk about James Tracy. James Tracy was a tenured professor at Florida Atlantic University. Once you have tenure, you've got to do something really horrible to lose your job. And what James Tracy did was he basically put out his opinion that the official story about the Sandy Hook shooting is open to doubt. That's it. Now, Tracy did not do this in his classroom at the Florida Atlantic University. He did not do this on the computers of the Florida Atlantic University. James Tracy expressed this opinion as a private citizen on his own personal blog. And the university revoked his tenure and fired him. Now, Tracy is suing, and I hope he wins. I hope he winds up owning the place. Because there is a little thing called the First Amendment. And we live in a country right now where you can't question the government without bad things happening to you. Lose your job, lose your career, have your server attacked. We have a when I was a kid, which was admittedly a long time ago, colleges and universities were supposed to be forums for open discussion of all ideas, because these are the people who are going to inherit leadership of the nation. And they were encouraged to experiment with new ideas and new concepts, better ways to run things for the future. And today our universities are rigid enforcers of the status quo. You will believe in global warming. You will not question Sandy Hook. And for that treatment, they expect you to go into debt with the student loans. So we have this university that's out there saying, oh, no, the First Amendment doesn't exist on our campus, or even in your private home if you work for us. Apparently, attacking freedom of speech doesn't seem to affect the university's standing. They could care less. I mean, that's tyranny in action. That's right fully on display. If this professor had done this in his classroom, on university grounds, in his role as a professor, there'd be merit to firing him and taking away his tenure. That's legitimate. When I was teaching visual effects and computer animation at UH, I never, ever talked about anything in that classroom other than computer animation and visual effects, because that's what I was there to do. But this Tracy was on his own time, his own computer, as himself as a human, as a person, as a citizen. And for his university to punish him for having that opinion shows you that universities have become part of the dictatorship. To make sure your children conform, that they accept the borderless world, as Kerry is telling them to do. When we craft a society that does not allow the next generation to grow beyond our own limits, then we are going to fall behind the rest of the world. It is that simple. All right, we're going to take a phone call. John in Barbados, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Getting back to Facebook, I've just been entered into a third 30-day ban for criticizing Israel, I think. And I've been censored. I've been, what is this free speech? I can certainly say that Facebook is falling by the wayside now. And I would like to ask anybody who's listening, is there a real alternative that gives you a modicum of free speech? Because that certainly Facebook does not. So I decided that I've completely deleted my account, and I'm looking for a new home to go to.
Well, Mike in our control room is suggesting tsu.com. But, in the end, social media, rather your email lists and so forth, or set up a website, we can get around Facebook censorship. Now, remember, they weren't actually deleting the articles. They were just de-emphasizing them. I've gone through the same thing at YouTube, where we've made these music videos around Claire's music, and the viewership numbers are going up and up, almost to the point where it's going to get on one of the lists of things to look at, and then all of a sudden, magically, the numbers reset down to just a 100 or 200. And I've seen this several times. And obviously, these organizations are targets for government infiltration, and it's coupled with the fact that the owners of these corporations, they're very full of themselves. They think their position in life gives them some kind of immunity where they don't have an obligation to treat other people fairly and with respect.
My second sort of point is this nonsense coming out of Cameron lately about the Brexit. He's gone from the sublime to the ridiculous.
He's gone to desperation. I mean, for the comments he's making, this is desperation. You know, it's going to be the end of Great Britain. The Death Star is going to come down. The dinosaurs will come back to life. Ebola. And it basically betrays just how desperate he is. Because if the people of Britain vote to leave the European Union, one of two things is going to happen. Great Britain will leave the EU, and the EU will start to come apart. TTIP will be dead, and the path to the New World Order will have gone off a cliff. Or Britain's government will do what the Dutch government did and say, we're going to ignore the public referendum and do what we want to do, and that will result in a civil war.
Well, I think if you look at the blogs in the UK on the various news outlets and what have you, this nonsense that the Brexit is neck and neck is what it is, nonsense. The actual numbers of those wanting to get out is above 66%.
That's what I've been hearing, but, you know, don't forget what they did with the Scottish independence referendum. They weren't even trying to hide the election fraud. And if they're planning on trying to steal the Brexit vote, and they are, then they have to rig the polls so that they kind of line up so that people don't get suspicious, which is not going to work. We're already suspicious.
Well, actually, I've already sent an email to 10 Downing Street telling them that we're watching them for the election fraud, and if it happens, we're going to let all hell break loose.
Well, you know, the last time I was in London, I did visit the tower, and that big wood block is still there.
Yes, we can lay his head there and take that big axe.
Okay, don't bother sharpening it.
Now let's move on to the final subject I want to talk about.
Okay.
Is this Syrian, if you like, this Syrian war. It's a war of foreigners on the Syrian government and the Syrian people. Hardly any of those fighters are actually Syrian.
No, they're hired mercenaries.
Yep. What's coming out is absolute nonsense from the mainstream media. The Western media is absolutely giving crazy analysis of what's really happening. I mean, the Russians have done a damn good job up to now, but I think they need to finish it quickly.
Yeah, I'm in agreement, and I really do think that the only reason the U.S. went along with this temporary ceasefire was to allow their hired mercenaries to regroup, rearm, and be resupplied, because as soon as Russia said we're going to cool it on Aleppo, the U.S.-sponsored terrorist groups launched a major offensive to try and retake Aleppo. So my guess is probably going to be that by tomorrow, the Russian air assets are going to be back at work again.
I would think so. But finally, the U.S. election and this nonsense with an electoral college. Why not simply, if you are one nation, not all these separate little nations, why not just have a simple majority and do away with this electoral college, this anachronism from years ago when the Pony Express riders were around?
Well, I absolutely agree with that. The Electoral College was set up partly because getting vote tallies, from across the country that were known to be accurate was virtually impossible. And so you'd get the elector knowing that the state governor had more or less validated this person to be there. Obviously, it's not necessary right now. And we do need a unified standard election system, one that is open, transparent. If it's electronic, the software has to be open to public inspection, and there has to be a mechanism to guarantee that that is the software running on that machine. Personally, I think it's time to get rid of those computers. Because, just because of the way Microsoft has botched up Vista and Millennium Edition and Windows 10 here. But again, I maintain that if the government cannot prove beyond all doubt that the elections by which they claim authority over us and our wallets are honest, fair, and verifiable, then we, the people, are neither legally nor morally obligated to obey that government, to pay that government's bills, and certainly not to sacrifice life and limb of our children in that government's wars of conquest. We need a zero-tolerance policy here.
I think we should apply that same principle to the Brexit vote.
Yeah, you should have. You should have applied it to the Scottish independence referendum.
And, well, thank you for having me, Michael. I'm using a new way of calling in.
You sound much better. You sound much better. I mean, much clearer.
RBN Skype 2 is what I'm coming in on.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so thank you for the recommendation of TSU.com. I'll hook in there straight away with my new Linux. Because
Okay.
I've got Windows.
I'm getting ready to. It's just a major problem. All right, well, listen, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to be letting you go. I was just taking a look over here at Fox News. They're leading with Justin Bieber's big announcement, and I have no idea what it is because I could care less. Meanwhile, story coming out of the DailyBail.com. Former chief of the National Security Agency, Michael Hayden, has gone public, saying every foreign intelligence service in the world was thumbing through Hillary's email server. He made this statement publicly at a TechCrunch conference, saying it was a catastrophe for national security. Oh, we've got Ryan Dawson calling on in. Ryan, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Ryan, are you there?
He's not here.
Oh, he's not? I see you were saying Ryan Dawson uses TSU. All right, I misunderstood. Okay. So here we have, again, did she just accidentally put all these secrets out where all these foreign intelligence services are gaining access to it? I don't think so. The more of these revelations come on out, the more convinced I am that we're on to the scandal of the century, if not the entire nation's history. Hayden is out there saying every intelligence service in the world was thumbing through her server. Guccifer said that he saw at least 10 foreign IPs prowling through the server. Now we're finding out that money that was going into Hillary Clinton's foundation was first collected by Canadian corporations to conceal its source, then sent on down. I'm convinced there's a there. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm already getting emails with alternatives to Facebook that do not, as far as we know, practice censorship. One of them, of course, is Russia's version of Facebook, which is vk.com. Then there's another one called scene.is, which is an uncensored social media site. All right, we're going to go to the phones here. Alex in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Not much, Michael. I wanted to let you know it's good to have you back, but I also want to let you know I'm in trouble because I was watching MSNBC and CNN for the polling results last night for West Virginia, and the host, they kept on saying, why is Bernie still in the race? And I wish so much I could have come on TV and said because Hillary Clinton should be indicted for her freaking email scam.
Isn't that amazing that these talking heads are out there saying, boy, why is Bernie Sanders still in the race here in West Virginia? Because he's winning.
That's right. And because it's been such a rigged election this whole time. And I must say that I do think that Bernie Sanders is not one of the establishment. I think he's the candidate that is not of the establishment.
Well, he's certainly less of the establishment than Hillary Clinton, which is why you have the TV networks trying to say, get on out of here. You're spoiling our party. You and Donald Trump, you're just going to ruin it for all the money junkies.
That's right. And I saw that Bernie Sanders has actually said that the press is part of the establishment, which we should all know.
Of course they are. Of course they are. The Operation Mockingbird, I mean, that's the overt control of the corporate media by the Central Intelligence Agency. And there's all kinds of levels of control, FBI informants who are working inside all of these institutions, trying to influence things. the corporatized media, and of course is subject to their corporate realities. When we were talking the other day about this epidemic of faulty and possibly dangerous generic drugs being manufactured in India and pouring into this country, you're not going to see that on any of the corporate TV news because they are dependent on those advertising dollars from pharmaceutical companies and companies that sell these things, and they're not going to gore their own ox. It's like I just said this with this thing with Fox News. Justin Bieber's great announcement. Like, who cares?
That's right.
Whatever Justin doesn't affect my life. News is what actually affects my life and your life. Everything else is advertising.
That's right. So if anyone ever thought that the Democrats and the freaking press was different than the Republicans and Fox News, they are not. They are exactly the same. And if anyone has ever worked for a big legitimate corporation, and if you ever used your private email within that organization, you're gone. If you don't know that, then no, then I don't know who doesn't know that. And when you put a private server and redirect the government's email to your private server, that is a no-no.
Oh, absolutely. Hillary was breaking all the rules and all the laws, and her attitude is, I didn't mean to... I meant well, so therefore you should let me off. We have to take a break for station identification. Thank you very much for the phone call, Alex, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Mike, the other Mike, is still in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions. Now, as you know, the Tsarnaev case is not going away. Tamerlan Tsarnaev was killed. Dzhokhar was almost killed. Then he was taken to trial with a government-appointed lawyer who basically went into the case and told the jury, yeah, he did it. Just fry him on up. Get him out of here. Get him out of the public eye. And there is compelling evidence that the Tsarnaevs were set up and framed. I could have gotten Dzhokhar Tsarnaev off. And I'm not a trained lawyer. Okay. Now, mostly it's because of the photographic evidence from the scene. The remains of the backpack that held the bomb are black with this very unique white square patch. The Tsarnaevs were photographed at the scene wearing a white and a gray backpack. There were a group of men there with black jackets and khaki pants. A number of them looked like it was a uniform. And one of them was photographed before the bombing with a black backpack with a white square on the top of it, and after the bombing, the same man was photographed without a backpack. That is your reasonable doubt right there. So, what's going on right now? Well, according to this story out of Blacklisted News, Tamerlan Tsarnaev's immigration records, his A file, were finally released in February under the Freedom of Information Act and posted online by the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Now, the Freedom of Information Act has a frequently requested record provision where if more than a few people are asking for the record, it's basically put up in a publicly accessible place. Now, here is where it gets interesting. There was testimony from Tsarnaev's friends and family that the FBI had been around him. Was he an informant? Was he an asset? The FBI steadfastly denies that they had any interest in him prior to the bombing. But they're seeing his reports. Tsarnaev's attempts to become a citizen were being held up with what was called a national security concern, which means that the FBI did think there was an issue. They were aware of him. But having your citizenship held up by a national security concern doesn't mean you're a danger. Because what the FBI likes to do for anybody coming in from the Middle East is they'll hold up your naturalization with this national security concern, and then they'll come on over and they'll say, we'll make you a deal. We'll drop the national security concern and let you become a U.S. citizen as long as you will spy for us. This is the ACLU was looking into the abuses of this system and saying that the FBI did this routinely. Would interfere with people coming to the United States and trying to become legal citizens to turn them into informants and spies. And in some cases, patsies. Certainly that's the case here. Now, up in Canada, as you know, they are dealing with that horrible, horrible fire. They're dealing actually with multiple fires. And we know that Canada, because of their own economic difficulties and having to spend money on wars and give money to Israel and everything, had actually neglected fire prevention in the area. It's always a recipe for disaster. You have to keep that overburden of dead brush under control, either with controlled burns or bulldozing it. And you've got to keep those fire roads open and maintained. These weren't being done around Fort McMurray. But nobody wants to admit that the government is to blame for not taking care of things. So once again, we have this article out of the CBC saying that the fires were fueled by the warming climate, and we're going to see more of that. They're already out there saying, oh, we've got a fire. We can say global warming. Blame the global warming, and we can duck the blame ourselves for not taking care of the country. Now, we are just coming out of yet another record winter. It was snowing in Palm Springs 2 days ago. They just got 20 inches of snow in Bozeman, Montana. And still they're out there, global warming, global warming, global warming. And to add egg to the CBC's face, as it richly deserves, investigators are now saying that at least 10 of these wildfires up in Canada are believed to have been deliberately set. It's an arsonist, firebug, if you will, or somebody who's trying to lower the value of land prior to its acquisition for mining rights. Now, here's a story that's going to make you go, ew. Story coming out of Business Insider, no less. Food analytics platform Clear Labs went on out and started doing molecular analysis of products called burgers. And what they found was a little appalling. They found substitute ingredients, fillers, hygiene problems, contamination in 13.6% of the 258 burger products the company analyzed. The company included ground meat, frozen patties, fast food burger products, and even veggie burger products. Some of the most alarming numbers: 4.3% of the samples contained traces of pathogenic DNA. Rat DNA was found in 3 products, and human DNA was discovered in one frozen vegetarian burger. I guess it wasn't vegetarian after all, and I think we just figured out what they're doing with all those dead homeless people. Call it Soylent Brown. As the economy gets worse and worse, companies are just allowed to sell whatever they can sweep up off the floor and get out of the warehouse, put it together, and get it out the door, because money, money, money is all that counts right now. Now, as you know, there is still an ongoing debate over cannabis or marijuana, or as we call it here in Hawaii, pakalolo. Paka meaning smoke and lolo meaning crazy. And the legalization, or the decriminalization, if you will, of marijuana has had an adverse effect on the profits of both the tobacco and the alcohol industries. And they're trying to fight back. They want to end this experiment with decriminalization of marijuana, even though marijuana is actually less harmful than either alcohol or tobacco. But they don't want you to have access to it because you can actually grow marijuana in your backyard. And if you're growing it in your backyard, then you are not going down to that store to buy alcohol and tobacco in packages and give them your money for it. How dare you grow your own intoxicants? They're really up in arms about that. Now, somebody has already gone out, especially since Colorado decriminalized marijuana, and they said, how's this going to affect driving? And there's been research whether minor amounts of cannabis would adversely affect driving, and so far they haven't found it. I mean, if you're blitzed out of your mind, then yes, there's a danger, but just mildly mellow. It seems to have less impact on driving skills and awareness than alcohol of the same effect would, for whatever reason. But CBS News got caught by activist posts of absolutely distorting one of these studies to declare in their headline that legal pot doubles the number of fatal car crashes. Basically said that they warped the actual study information to the point of being unrecognizable. Remember, what corporate television sells is you. Corporate television is designed to lure you all in with programming of dubious quality and then put you all set up in a mentally receptive state for the commercial. That's their business. They're there to sell you things. They're selling you to the advertisers. They're selling you to the politicians. That's their business. They could care less about accuracy, honesty, fairness, and truth. That's not what they're concerned about. And again, all the media is owned by just a few large corporations, and they all have other entanglements with other corporations, like the alcohol and tobacco companies. Now, alcohol and tobacco advertising, well, tobacco advertising is banned on TV. Alcohol companies are still advertising. The TV networks don't want to interfere with that, so they're going to go with the flow and say, oh yeah, marijuana is bad. I remember seeing a poster once long ago when I was a kid saying that God made marijuana and man made alcohol. Who are you going to trust? Actually, technically, both tobacco and marijuana are natural products. Although, who knows? I mean, I assume somewhere out there somebody's already planning to GMO it all up. Do you realize the absurdity of our drug policy? We have people who are in prison solely because they were smoking marijuana at a time where the U.S. federal government is trying to patent cannabis for its medical benefits. It's absurd. Now, yesterday we were talking about this study that was done up in North Dakota that confirmed soil at the surface water in North Dakota is contaminated with fracking waste, including radioactive materials, heavy metals, and corrosive salts. This research was done by Duke University, published in Environmental Science and Technology, and basically says the surface of the earth is becoming toxic to life. Now we're hearing that this is a tremendous concern because obviously the contamination of the soil doesn't stop at the edge of farms, does it? So if it's coming up along the side of the road, it's probably also coming up in the middle of that wheat field over there. And this is a tremendous threat to organic agriculture. Because people who want organic food, they don't want GMO, but they also don't want radioactive isotopes and other toxic chemicals in their food. They're trying to eat healthy. You don't want to eat healthy. That's a mental illness. It's called orthorexia nervosa. You need a Big Mac right now. But that's a problem. And this fracking contamination, it's already in our water in many parts of the country. They've already contaminated 2 out of 3 of California's main aquifers with fracking chemicals. It's coming out of the tap water. California was actually talking about using fracking wastewater for irrigating crops due to the drought out there. And that means the plants would be taking up the water along with the chemicals and radioactive isotopes. It's called bioaccumulation. In fact, one of the practices when they're cleaning up a radioactive spill is to basically create a new ground cover of plants that are chosen because they will basically suck up materials like polonium and hold it in their leaves to make it easier to remove and to dispose of. And now it's happening in our food plants. Talk about a short-sighted policy. Pumping all these dangerous chemicals in the ground and just hoping they were going to stay down there. And they don't. And they know there's a problem. What do they do about it? Oh, they just go on doing the problem, and they try and make fun of anybody who says, I think there's an issue here. I mean, with the precautionary principle, shouldn't we basically pull back and say, let's not do anything until we know 100% it's safe? As opposed to the current attitude, which is, we know we can make money. Let's go do it. If it blows up, we'll make the taxpayers pay for it. No matter how cynical I get, I just can't keep up. Article coming out of the ThriveMovement.com. Who is killing the healers and why? And they're talking about all these health practitioners dying under mysterious circumstances. They start off with this case from back in June of 2015. Dr. Jeffrey Bradstreet went missing and then was discovered floating face down in a North Carolina river with a bullet hole in his chest, which was declared a suicide. Okay, his family said, no, he was not in a suicidal mood. He was perfectly fine. Who shoots themselves in the chest to commit suicide while standing right at the edge of a river so that they fall backwards into the water? Getting rid of the gun. It's absurd. It doesn't happen. Plus, there's something else you need to remember. Men, when they shoot themselves, tend to shoot themselves in the head. Women who commit suicide with a firearm will shoot themselves in the chest because they want to, they're worried about their looks. For a gunshot to the chest, that also argues against suicide. And remember, under U.S. law, normal forensic practice, you presume it is a homicide until you can prove suicide, which they certainly can't in this case. They don't have the gun. They've got nothing except somebody somewhere called up and say that this is a suicide. Yes, sir, Mr. CEO, I will do that. So now we have a story coming out of Government Slaves about another one. Dr. Rasmussen, who was teaching classes on the subject of biology and nutrition, was stabbed more than 30 times and found dead in her Plymouth home this past week. She was 76 years old, a devoted grandmother, former foster mother to at least 20 kids. Now, they're claiming that she had a neighbor who was mentally ill that they're looking for. Okay, if he was mentally ill to that degree, why was he not already incarcerated? Was he on prescription antidepressants? That's another question I'd like them to ask. Now, we've been talking about the CDC, about how it is less a U.S. government agency interested in the public health and more basically a front and shill for the pharmaceutical industry, especially since William Thompson went public with the fact that their report that claimed there was no link between the MMR vaccine and autism was an absolute fake and a fraud. And the CDC itself even admits half of these vaccines don't work. But by golly, you will take them because they make money for the pharmaceutical industries, and the pharmaceutical industries send us lots of goodies. Now there's a story coming out of here in USA Today that is probably going to give CDC a much-needed dose of humble. The CDC, along with various other facilities like USAMRIID, very often are working with weaponizable pathogens, the BSL-4s. And apparently there have been so many mistakes that CDC has had their permits suspended multiple times for serious safety violations working in BSL-4. None of this was made public. I think the people living around this CDC lab ought to be told when somebody slips and drops a test tube full of a weaponized anthrax or something. The CDC's own labs have also been referred for additional federal enforcement action 6 times because of repeated violations in how they've handled certain viruses, bacteria, and toxins. All of this kept secret from the public. Now, these weaponized pathogens, obviously, there's a tremendous risk there. They have high secondary communicability, except for anthrax. That's what makes them a bioweapon. I think it's insane to be working with these things anyway. Their excuse is, oh, well, we assume these other countries are making these things, therefore we have to make them so that we're prepared to defend ourselves. I don't think so. I think there's a little too much arrogance going on in our military thinking. They actually think they can control this stuff. I remember that Charlie Bravo nuclear test out in the Pacific. They thought they had that under control. Bomb turned out to be 3 times as powerful as they thought. Now, you irradiated a bunch of Japanese people. These things are not always under control. And when you're dealing with weaponized germs, that can get completely out of control. And the idea that the people living around CDC were not being told, that's appalling. All right, we got to take a break for phone calls, for commercials. We'll have one phone call waiting when we come on back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go right to the phones. Keith in Montana. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I just sent you an email. It's entitled Tom L. R-A-R-E. You should read that. It's a very good analogy of Palestine and Israel.
Okay, I'm looking at it right now here. Are you there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let's. Yeah.
We're enjoying our winter over here in Montana still.
Yeah, I mean, Bozeman got, what, 20 inches?
Yeah, it's been raining here all day. Like, I'm just laying here with my handsome black boyfriend, Milo.
Yeah. Before anybody misunderstands, Milo is this wonderful, wonderful black lab. Okay, anything else there?
No, but I like the analogy to where they said raining rockets compared to 4 drops a day or something like that, or a month like that does not consider rain like that, but it's a pretty good analogy on that.
Yeah, it's pretty intense there. I mean, let's see, they got snow, they're getting snow over Michigan, the peninsula. They got snow Sunday in Palm Springs out in California. This winter is not letting go. We are obviously going into a new Maunder minimum and a new little ice age, and still the carbon Nazis are out there saying global warming, global warming. And as you know, the White House science advisor is now in the hot seat because he came out with this video saying that global warming causes colder winters. He got called on it. They said, show us the documentation that supports this statement. Filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit. The White House refused the lawsuit, saying it was just this guy's personal opinion and not official White House policy. Then it came out that, yes, the White House had presented it as official policy, and so now they're just going on back and forth. Basically what it comes down to, there's no scientific basis for the claim that global warming creates colder winters. It was just more USDA choice bovine excrement flung at you by the White House, desperate to get your money in carbon taxes. And now they got caught. And they're just going to huff themselves up and say, how dare you, we're the administration, we're the government, we're above the reproach and censure of the people. Actually, that was the same mistake King Louis XVI made.
I got another one for you. Do you remember those USDA charts I was sending you that showed you the annual precipitation for Montana?
Yes.
Yeah, most areas was well above 90 or even up to 140 some odd percent. And I noticed last week they dropped it all down to 80%, and we have had just constant rain.
Yeah, I mean, they're back to pushing, global warming and drought, and a lot of areas. Yeah. I mean, we've got flooding and major thunderstorms, and they're still out there saying drought. You'd better stock up on your bottled water from Nestle because otherwise you're going to go thirsty. I mean, it's just nothing but one hoax and fraud after the other. I think they're trying to overwhelm us, where we're all just go into shock and say, yes, okay, whatever, yes, global warming is real. Lee Oswald shot Kennedy. The Nazis were bad and sunk the Lusitania without reason, and whatever all else is going on out there. But I know from myself personally, every time I have another one of these lies thrown at me, I just get angrier and angrier and angrier, and so should you.
Well, yeah, that's the same thing. I sent you the stories here about our joint water thing over here, in which they've nullified the voting. canceled everything, and of course, talking about putting meters on our wells. More of that story that you had yesterday on the site there. About
I remember that when they want to put a water meter on the well on your property and charge you for your water. I mean, that is just really out there. And
then I was going to say also, Mike, one of the realtors told me that any property around here being sold now is being sold without water rights.
That's just absurd. I mean, that is just absolutely absurd. It's like all these states now that will actually fine you if you collect rainwater on your own property. You know, those are the king's raindrops, you knave. You're not allowed to touch them unless you pay a corporation for them, which is really what it's all about. They're trying to cut us off from nature to make us dependent on corporations for everything. And that, of course, was the mistake King George XIII made with the American colonies.
Yeah, well, like I still say, the United States today and their alleged fighting Nazi Germany against fascism and tyranny and all this stuff like that, I can't see the difference. So,
I think we've gone far worse than the Nazis in Washington, D.C. Anyway, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, early in the program, we were talking about Jack Yantis, the rancher who was called by the sheriff's department to put down an escaped bull, showed up, and was killed by the sheriffs. And that issue is not going away. And I'm looking now at this article where apparently several Arizona legislators have signed a letter urging the Oregon governor to live up to her statements questioning the FBI's involvement in the murder of another rancher, Lavoy Finicum. Now, all of a sudden, we are seeing the United States government and primarily the Bureau of Land Management declaring war on ranches. Why? They want the land. They want the land so they can sell the mineral rights to make money. And the fact that the land has rightful owners, well, we'll just legalize and say they have to go away. And we saw that at the Bundys and now Finicum. It's incredibly corrupt. Apparently, there's a prosecutor out there saying that he's got the goods on Harry Reid for all this land snatching under color of law. And I'd like to remind everybody, there is a part of the Constitution called the Enclave Clause, which says the federal government is only allowed to own the land underneath federal buildings, federal infrastructure like airports and harbors, and military bases. The government is not allowed to own any other land. And the Founding Fathers put that in there to prevent exactly what we're seeing today. A hopelessly in-debt federal government trying to save itself by stealing the American people's birthright, the public lands, and in some cases private lands, and auctioning them off. Because the government is explicitly forbidden from doing so. And these ranchers are in the moral right to stand up and defend their homes. We're going to take a phone call. Anthony in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I don't know if you brought up in the beginning of the show. Did you see that article about how the Saudis were financing Netanyahu's campaign?
Yes, I did.
Yes, and I think it pretty much says two things. It really shows how much the Saudis are supporting the Palestinians. It's kind of funny how they talk about not recognizing Israel, but that really says a lot. The most important thing too is I think that really cements Israeli-Saudi role in 9/11. I think that really says a lot about that as well. So it seemed like it was low level in the news, but I think that that definitely dictates a lot. So it was interesting, but I guess not surprising to see that. The second
wait a minute. Yeah. There's another way to look at that. We know that Israel has been blackmailing the U.S. government over 9/11. And what if the Saudis are financing Netanyahu's campaign not out of some kind of alliance, but because Netanyahu's doing the same to them? He's called them up and said, look, you guys were, you were the paymasters for this little operation the Americans and Israel did together, but, we're going to go public and say you were responsible for it all unless you start writing me some hefty campaign checks. That may have been the real purpose behind all this talk about the 28 pages. Not necessarily to get the truth out, but to scare Saudi Arabia into giving Netanyahu some much-needed financial support.
You're absolutely right. That makes sense as well. You're right. The Israelis could be blackmailing the Saudis because they could, they could get Congress to say that the Saudis were were 100% involved, and the Israeli and the American neoconservative world gets diminished in that. You're absolutely right. That makes sense as well. So that's a great point. The other thing I wanted to bring up, just sidetracking to the Trump campaign, I like some of the tactics he's using. He was talking recently about, taxing the rich more, and possibly, initially he said he wasn't for raising the minimum wage. Now he's kind of backtracked on that, saying the state should be doing that. And I think that's a brilliant idea. I think the absolute best strategy for him right now is to go after the Bernie Sanders supporters who are completely disenfranchised with Hillary Clinton. So I think that's a brilliant tactic right now. I think he's got to keep hampering on that and really tell the Bernie Sanders supporters that, he's looking after their interests a lot more than Hillary Clinton is. I don't know if
that's a message that's getting traction. The latest polls are showing that 44% of Democrats will vote for Donald Trump if Hillary is the Democratic nominee.
Yes, and her move pissing off those coal workers in West Virginia definitely wasn't a good move on her part, and that's just the beginning. He hasn't even gone on the emails and all the other crap that's really on her. So I think by the time we get into the election campaign, I think Donald Trump's absolutely going to devastate her. I don't even think it'll be close by the end of the race.
I'm hoping I'm hoping that Hillary comes out of the general election feeling like a baby seal. I want to see her just lying on the ground in a puddle, crying her head off. After all the things she's done to so many people, including me and my wife, I want to see her absolutely ruined.
Yeah, and even Bernie Sanders said he said today, you think he's going for the VP, but he came out and honestly said, he goes, Hillary Clinton is going to be an absolute catastrophe for the Democratic Party. So he's absolutely right on that. So, but it's a good riddance. Hopefully, she should have learned her lesson back in 2008. She hasn't, and hopefully she'll learn it this time.
No, she never will. She's a true sociopath. Okay? She's absolutely convinced that she is right, and anybody who doesn't agree with her is clearly in the wrong. And even if she loses when she loses the election in November, unless she has Donald Trump shot, if she loses in November, she's going to come out of it still thinking, I've been denied my rightful place as ruler of the world, and she'll find some other way to try and become General Secretary of the UN or the first Empress of the New World Order. She's absolutely sociopathic personality. Okay?
Absolutely. Okay, thanks a lot.
All right, thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Jerry in Chicago. Jerry, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Thank you for taking my call. You mentioned that rancher out there in Idaho that came out to take care of his bull. I don't know if you heard the whole story, but this happened like October, November of last year.
November 1st. Okay,
November. Well, he was called because I guess the brand on the bull led it to his place, and he was, as a responsible rancher, he got his trailer, his backhoe, and he got his rifle. And he went out there, and he assessed the situation, and he was kind of angry to find 2 magazines of .40 caliber bullets in the bull, but none in the head. And the cops said, well, we tried to put him down. We just couldn't do it. And, I mean, common sense tells you a headshot puts an animal down and puts it out of its misery. He signaled his wife to get his rifle out of the front seat of the truck. And as she walked up, she handed it to him. He bolted it, and as he raised it up to fire, one of the cops pushed down on the muzzle of the gun, and he misfired it or pulled the trigger, and they both opened up and shot him to death.
Yeah, that sounds about right. That sounds like what I heard. We have a consistent pattern all over the United States of America where the police, first of all, they are higher per capita users of these prescription antidepressants than the general population, and the general population is already at 1 out of every 4 people are on these dangerous medications. 2, we have all these Israeli security companies that are training our domestic police not to protect and to serve, but to treat us all like we're potential terrorists. and to basically shoot first and ask questions later. And don't worry, you know, we'll give you a drop gun and we'll cover for you, and you're never going to be punished for anything that you do. You know, the American police force are being trained and conditioned to treat the American people the way the IDF treats the Palestinians. Can you see the parallels going on here?
Yeah, it's amazing, but I'm glad you covered that story again. And I still looking for information on it, because the family came out and they were held at bay. They could not go and see their father or anything for 3 or 4 hours, and they were distraught. I don't blame them. I mean, this guy was born and raised in there, and he lived there all of his life, and they knew he was no threat. So thanks again for covering that story. Have a great day.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. And the fact that the Adams County Sheriff Department was trying to find that one police officer who's basically, he's on the run. He's split. He's gone. Past history of domestic violence. And he's out there. He was seen, you know, collecting multiple guns, putting them in his vehicle. It's thought he may even have explosives. And the Adams County Sheriff's Department is trying to locate him. And now they want to arrest him, but they're trying to say the public doesn't have a right to know, the public doesn't have a right to know, it'll make the police look bad. No, it's the actions of the officers that are making the police departments look bad. You need to get away from this idea that everything in life is a public relations problem that can be fixed with enough public relations dollars, and need to get back to a society that says, let's fix the problem itself. Then we don't have to worry about the public image. Our government deals with every crisis with a PR stunt. Obama down in Flint, Michigan, drinking a suspiciously crystal clear glass of water and insisting it came out of the taps of Flint, Michigan, which we know is a lie, because what's coming out of the taps of Flint, Michigan is brown. And they're not going to fix the water pipes. The mayor of Flint got caught diverting donations to get safe drinking water for the people of Flint into her election campaign PAC. They're not interested in actually making the country any better or the city any better. They just want to look good. That's what politics is in the media age. I have to look good. I will take credit for things that I didn't do, and anything bad I did, I will blame on some underling and offer them up to be fried on national TV. And meanwhile, the country continues to go downhill. Here's a story, and I find this very upsetting. This is over at conservativeview.com, and it's talking about a surprise inspection of VA kitchens in those hospitals. And they basically literally went into these VA hospitals in the middle of the night to take a look at what was really going on. Didn't want a nice guided tour, didn't want them to know they were even coming. And apparently the cockroach infestation was so severe in these kitchens that cockroaches were being served in the patient meals. I mean, how many years now have we been hearing about the deplorable condition that our wounded veterans are having to deal with? And nothing has been fixed yet. We get speeches. Oh, this is a terrible crisis and we must deal with it. We get lots of speeches. The problems haven't been dealt with. We're dealing with a government that is totally obsessed with image and completely oblivious to substance. Even under the best of conditions, hospital food is crud. Adding cockroaches into it, I don't think is going to make things any better. And I think we all ought to be appalled, because regardless of whether we agree with the wars or not, and I do not, we all do owe a debt of honor to everybody who put on that uniform and sacrificed to fight the wars they were told to fight. The government is not honoring that debt. They're trying to get off cheaply. We're hearing where the VA is simply ignoring veterans, hoping they'll just die and go away, and those that are actually getting into the system are being fed cockroaches. If you are a parent and you have a child of military age who's seeing all these expensive, glitzy commercials on TV about how great it is to be in the global force for good, you need to pull out these articles and show these kids what's really going on out there. and talk them out of enlisting. Because you are not going to get the great job the recruiters are promising you. The courts have already ruled promises made by recruiters to get your kid to sign that contract are not legally enforceable. Your kid's signature on that contract is legally enforceable. It's a one-way contract. Now, a story coming out of MotherJones.com. Texas Republicans inch closer to secession. There may be, this November, might be the last time Texans vote for a president. Because today the Platform Committee of the Texas Republican Party voted to put a Texas independence resolution up for a vote at the state GOP convention. And I think that's a good idea. I think if Hillary steals the White House in November, all 50 states should secede. And we'll let Empress Hillary I rule that little 10-mile by 10-mile square, Sodom on the Potomac. And we'll just go off on and about our way. I remember somebody was asking me before Ted Cruz dropped out of the race for at least the first time, you know, if it comes down to Ted Cruz and Hillary Clinton, how are you going to vote? And I said, immediate secession. That's how I'm going to vote. Now, over in Europe, as you know, the United States has been deploying all these missile systems all over Europe. And now the U.S. has activated this system, much to the annoyance of Russia. The U.S. has put these nuclear-capable missiles all along confronting Russia, and they've turned them on because we must counter Russian aggression. I mean, come on, would you cut it out? You're getting ready to invade Russia. Russia is not the aggressor. You don't see Russian troops on the north side of the Canadian border. You don't see Russian troops on the southern side of our border with Mexico. You don't see Russian warships playing around in the Gulf of Mexico. And you don't have live Russian active potentially nuclear missiles sitting out there on Catalina Island pointed toward us. It's all encircling Russia. And no, we're not buying anymore that Russia is the bad guy that must be contained. That may have worked back in the 1950s when the American people were dangerously naive and childishly trusting in everything the government and the media said. But we are sadder but wiser now today. We know the government lies about things like Saddam's nuclear weapons, Lusitania's weapons, Assad's sarin gas, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. On and on and on and on. Americans are the most lied to people on the face of the earth, but the difference is we know it now, which is why when you tell us that you are getting ready to declare war on Russia, that it's somehow all Russia's fault, no, it is not. We know it. We know you're lying. Don't even think for a minute anybody is believing what's coming out of Washington, D.C. anymore. Shame on you for thinking that we, the people, are that stupid and naive, because we're not. All right, we got to take another break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few commercial words, so please stay tuned, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of the program today. We're going to skip on back to Hillary Clinton's email server, and drip by drip by drip, the fact that there is a cover-up is becoming obvious to all. Now, journalist Jason Kobler issued a Freedom of Information Act request to the U.S. State Department for all communications, presentations, and procedures created by the State Department to secure Hillary Clinton's email from electronic threats. In other words, he wanted copies of all documents related to how the Department of State protected the information being kept on Hillary Clinton's private home email server. The State Department has just come on out saying they will not release this information until after the November election, which means they're covering something up, which means you, the voter, are free to imagine the absolute possible worst that Hillary may have been doing, like, for example, selling top-secret U.S. documents to other governments through that email server and using her charitable foundation and its Canadian subsidiaries to collect and launder the payments. Does that really sound that impossible? No, it doesn't. It sounds almost inevitable. based on the 1996 Chinagate scandal, based on the patterns of the Clintons throughout their years. It's not outlandish. It's quite reasonable, I think. Down in Venezuela, it's starting to get violent. Apparently, townspeople caught a looter and burned him alive. They're basically killing animals, pets, just for food. It's a humanitarian disaster. We're not seeing anybody try and do anything about it. We know the U.S. wants to use this opportunity to regime change Venezuela and put in a government that will run Venezuela for the benefit of American interests. They've been trying to do that ever since Hugo Chavez. Now, earlier in the show, we were talking about American burgers that are found to be contaminated with all kinds of things, including human DNA. Apparently, over in Germany, some restaurant there got it into their heads to come out with the Erdogan burger. It's delicious and juicy. And apparently the public reaction was so bad, he had to close shop completely. Yeah, I think that was over the top there. Speaking of ranchers, yet more abuse. Out in Wyoming, a rancher got a state permit to have a stock pond on his property. The EPA comes in and fines him $37,500 per day the stock pond is there and throws criminal charges on top of that. Money, 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 money. We are going to take his ranch. We're going to give it to the Bureau of Land Management. We can pledge it as collateral in the national debt. We can sell the uranium rights to Russian companies. Over at our store, we have a coffee cup that we sell that says the last official act of any government is to loot the nation. We're there. That's what's going on. The government is having to loot you, the people, of everything you have to try and stay in power in their temples in Sodom on the Potomac. Just another week, please. Just another week before we have to leave. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow, Thursday, here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical. Make good choices. Share everything you find here with everybody that you know. We need to overcome the influence of the corporate media. They may have all the money, but we outnumber them. We can do it. Until tomorrow, aloha, America.